Okay, we are here in Fair Oaks, Virginia today, the town of Sandston, Virginia. And here at this intersection, where the Richmond and York River Railroad train station once was in 1862 along the 9 Mile Road, this became one of the best landmarks during the American Civil War. The Fair Oaks station lay here on the north side of this junction. As a part of General Joseph Johnston's Confederate attack at Seven Pines on May the 31st, 1862, his troops, under Brigadier General Richard H. Anderson, passed here as they assaulted the Union right. Just a couple nights before, on June 29th, a Confederate artillery piece was pushed past this very intersection by a locomotive here and used during the Battle of Savage Station. It consisted of a siege gun mounted on a flat car behind a shield of rails. This was the very first time and first use of railroad artillery in warfare, something that you would see later at Petersburg in 1864. This marker that you see here is actually in the town today of Sandston, Virginia, which is in Henrico County. It's on the East 9 Mile Road, which is also Virginia Route 33. Today, while we're here in Sandston, we're going to talk a little bit about the Battle of Fair Oaks, also known as Seven Pines, which took place on May the 31st, 1862. We're going to talk about the brigades and the regiment that fought in this area. And we're also going to talk about how this may be one of the worst preserved battlefields in all of the study of the American Civil War. Totally decimated by housing and the Richmond International Airport. It is a battle, because of this, is rarely talked about and hardly understood. I have been studying this battle for about 25 years. I've drawn a hand-drawn map, and I've studied the regiments and the brigades that were in the area. So I'm going to try to lay them out in simple terms in this video to give the viewer a good portion of what happened in this area on May the 31st of 1862. I will be posting some historic photos as well as an etching and the map that I hand-drawn about 10 years ago and use when I come here to give tours to friends and family and visitors. Behind our camera would have been the divisions under Pettigrew, Pender, and General Hood, heading directly toward this train station. Hood with the 1st, 4th, and 5th Texas. Pender with the 4th Alabama, 6th North Carolina, 11th and 2nd Mississippi. Pettigrew with the 47th Virginia, 22nd North Carolina, 12th Arkansas, and 18th Georgia. All heading in this direction toward Fair Oaks train station. We will talk about the Confederate troops on the other side of the track, where you see the trees there in the distance, in the next part of this video, and then their head-on collision with Union troops from Birney's and Nagley's brigade. And again, this is the Fair Oaks station marker here on the 9 Mile Road, which today is Virginia Route 33. I always suggest to people that I'm giving tours of Fair Oaks battlefield that you start here. If you start here and then head down toward the old Williamsburg Stage Road, which we will drive to next, it'll give you the best perspective of the Battle of Fair Oaks. And if you can just imagine an old steam engine and some dirt roads and erase some of the modern buildings, businesses, telephone poles, and things like that, and the housing development that we'll be driving through. And you just have this as open fields surrounded by pine trees in your mind. You can then begin to picture what happened here and what the Fair Oaks battlefield looked like in May of 1862. So we're going to begin here at this point, and we're going to get in the car. We're going to drive through different areas of the development in the town of Sandston over the next 10 to 15 minutes, and I'm going to point out some spots and talk about some stories of things that happened here in May of 1862. So I hope we have fun. Join me, and we're going to go ahead and get rolling here in a minute and head over across the tracks where you see the trees in front of us there into today what is the modern development and the town of Sandston, Virginia. I would like to acknowledge some inspiration for this video. My wife, Jennifer, and my best friend, adopted father, Tom Nickerson, who's a big Civil War buff. And we are all here today why I'm doing this video live. So this video is dedicated to both of them and inspired me to continue doing videos of the American Civil War, not only in Gettysburg, but all across the Civil War landscape on the Eastern Hemisphere of the United States, the eastern part of the United States, or the Eastern Theater of the United States. So let's jump in the car, and we're going to get going here, and I hope you'll all follow along. Okay, I am here at Fair Oaks, Seven Pines, and I am a little wooded area just off of the 9 Mile Road. The 9 Mile Road runs right down here to where Fair Oaks Station once sat. And then this is Hines Street here. And thankfully, this area is still preserved and wooded. But this was actually the site of the camp of the 23rd Pennsylvania Bernie Zouaves on May the 30th, 1862, one day before they were engaged at the Battle of Fair Oaks, Seven Pines during the 7 Days campaign. They were camped here in this area. And then on the morning of May 31st, 1862, a lot of the men were here in the camp, and they were having their breakfast. They were having bacon. One man from the unit was actually getting a shave, and he had half of his beard shaved at the time the battle began. And when the battle began, in the regimental history, they mentioned how mad the men were because it was the first decent meal they had had in a while, and it was bacon at that, and they were forced to stop what they were doing and start the fight. And of course, the one man had half of a beard shaven off, so he had to go into battle with half a beard. This, according to some old maps, is the campsite of the 23rd Pennsylvania Bernie Zouaves here at Seven Pines, the Battle of Fair Oaks, May 31st, 1862. And it is one of the very little portions of what was a battlefield that is preserved today by a wooded area. And of course, the men were dug in around here, and it does appear that some of the original earthworks are still here inside the wooded area. So again, this is the history of the 23rd Pennsylvania as we come through Fair Oaks, Virginia, Seven Pines today, which is known as Sandston, Virginia, here just a couple hundred yards from Fair Oaks Station. Patient. We are now driving down what was the 9 Mile Road in 1862. On the left-hand side, as we go underneath this bridge, would have been the pine forest. In that pine forest was Bernie's division that had the 3rd and 4th Maine, the 40th New York, the 38th New York. Also in there would have been the 2nd Rhode Island, the 36th New York, the 55th New York, and the 31st Pennsylvania Volunteers. Today, these trees are what's left of that original pine forest. Now, as we make a right-hand turn, we would be following the path of Nagley's Union troops. This would consist of the 7th Massachusetts, the 62nd New York, the 61st Pennsylvania, and the 23rd Pennsylvania, also known as Bernie's Zouaves. In the distance, In front of us, as we're driving, were the brigades of Jenkins, G.B. Anderson, and Garland's Confederate Brigade. Jenkins would have the 6th South Carolina and the Palmetto soldiers. Anderson's brigade would have the 4th Georgia, 28th Georgia, 4th North Carolina, and the 49th Virginia. And Garland would have the 5th North Carolina, 38th Virginia, 23rd North Carolina, 24th Virginia, and 2nd Florida Volunteers. These Confederate soldiers coming toward the direction that we're driving in would clash with the Pennsylvania boys from the 23rd and 61st Pennsylvania in Jenkins' brigade. Today, this area looks nothing like it did in 1862, and as you can see, it's a modern housing development. In fact, the entire Battle of Fair Oaks is in the town of Sandston, which we're in today, which is a housing development, and then more extreme on the outskirts of the battlefield, where the Confederates came from, is Richmond International Airport. That is why the Battle of Fair Oaks, that took place on May 31st, 1862, is not interpreted very well anymore. Now, as I make this left-hand turn, we're going to be along the Confederate line. Behind us would be the left, in front of us would be the right. So we're leaving what was Jenkins, and now we're headed into the areas of G.B. Anderson's brigade, and then finally on to Garland's brigade. Okay, I'm here at Fair Oaks. I'm on McClellan Street, and this is the area where the 23rd Pennsylvania would have been fighting here in 1862. Just across the highway on the other side of that house would have been Fair Oaks Station. The 23rd Pennsylvania with the 61st Pennsylvania would have been heading in this direction straight ahead on May 31st, 1862. They then would have been hit very hard and pushed back in this direction over this way, back toward the 9 Mile Road. So again, we are here at the site of the Battle of Seven Pines on May the 31st, 1862, in the area where the 23rd Pennsylvania Bernie Zouaves were engaged, about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. One story I do want to mention is a soldier from Nagley's brigade in the 23rd Pennsylvania, and his name was Sergeant Frederick Huber. Huber was from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. His father was the town physician, and he wanted to take in his father's footsteps, went to Philadelphia to become medically trained. When the war broke out in 1860-61, Huber enlisted with the 23rd Pennsylvania Volunteers and was here on May 31st, 1862. In this area, at the next corner, he was wounded, most likely from soldiers from the 49th Virginia under Anderson's brigade. Right here where the stop sign is, across the street, there's a house, and there was a small little forested area where he was mortally wounded and died. This was witnessed by the regimental chaplain. Huber's last words were, "Tell my father I have died for my country." He died, and he was buried where you see the house there on the right-hand side today, near a very large cherry tree. His father came from Gettysburg all the way down here to what is today Sandston, Virginia, retrieved his son's body, and brought him back home to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and buried him in the Evergreen Cemetery. About 30 years ago, that tree was actually still there. It since has died in a storm. And I was able to determine his first burial place, and actually spoke with the owner of that house at the time, who has since passed away. Ironically enough, Huber's grave in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, has his final words, "Tell my father I've died for my country." And I myself, about 10 years ago, placed a second marker, a bronze ground marker, since the original headstone, which was struck by an artillery shell during the Battle of Gettysburg 9 months later, was partially damaged and wearing away. Also, the sword that Huber was carrying is back in Pennsylvania at a military collector's house in Enola, Pennsylvania, and I photographed myself holding the sword that he was killed with right here on this spot. The shame about the Battle of Fair Oaks is that most of the entire battlefield has been lost to development over the years, and there's only a few markers that remain that show anything that happened here, and as well as the Seven Pines Cemetery. Now, just behind our camera is a modern day school in which a bayonet charge actually happened between the brigades of Nagley against the Confederate troops of Jenkins, Anderson, and Garland's troops. Now, we're going to leave this area momentarily. We're going to go up a little ways, and we're going to make a left, and we're going to head back out to the area where the pine forest that the night before the Battle of Fair Oaks, that Union troops from Birney's brigade were encamped. Today, there is a convenience store that's at this location. So if you come down here to Sandston, Virginia, and you have this video with you, and you want to go into the parking lot of that convenience store, if you look across the road, you will see the remnants of the pine forest. So we're going to turn here, and at the very end of this road, we'll come to that convenience station. The pine forest had Birney's division on the right, their brigade, and on the left, right near the Williamsburg Stage Road, was Berry's brigade, which consisted of the 5th Michigan, the 3rd Michigan, the 3rd New York, and the 2nd Michigan. Those troops would be in what is today Seven Pines National Cemetery. So you have Berry's troops where the cemetery is, and then you have Birney's at the pine forest, which we'll see here in front of us in just a moment. Now, behind us in the distance, a few miles, is Richmond International Airport, and that is where the Confederate advance started from on May 31st, 1862. So Confederate troops would be heading in the direction that we're driving in now, and Union troops started from the point that's in front of us, which was the pine forest. Now, here we are at the convenience store. It's called John's Market, and as we pan across the road, you'll see the trees here, and that was the pine forest in which Birney's brigade was encamped in the morning of May 31st, 1862. And I want to look at one more spot here in just a moment that is pretty relevant and important to the Battle of Fair Oaks. Okay, I'm down here at the Seven Pines battlefield, and I'm at 18 Casey Street, which you can see is a private household today. And there's this marker that stands here, and this is where nearby stood the twin houses in which the Confederate troops charged Casey's redoubt here at the Battle of Seven Pines on May 31st, 1862. And I'll post a picture, but Casey's redoubt would have been behind the house slightly, right along the Williamsburg Stage Road, which today is Route 60. And right here behind this marker would have been the twin houses, which are long gone by now. But not many people who interpret the Battle of Seven Pines realize that this marker is even here. Again, it's located here next to this house at 18 Casey Street. Just in front of our camera, about 100 yards, is a public library with some waysides along Route 60, which is the Williamsburg Road, but was the Williamsburg Stage Road back in 1862. So again, this is Seven Pines Battlefield in Sandston, Virginia. So Berry's troops, the 3rd, 2nd, 5th Michigan, and 3rd New York, would have come up upon these houses, and they would have been opposed by Confederate brigades under Rains, which would have been the 13th Alabama, which I did a video about them in Gettysburg, the 26th Alabama, the 23rd Georgia, also the 6th Alabama, 12th Mississippi, 4th Virginia, and 2nd Alabama, all behind our camera. But mainly troops, Confederate troops from Rains Brigade, the 6th Georgia, 23rd Georgia, 28th Alabama, and 13th Alabama, would have clashed with Berry's Michigan and New York troops here around the Twin Houses and Casey's Redoubt. The Battle of Fair Oaks was great ground. It was near the contested city of Richmond. It had a railroad that ran right through it, which was anchored where we began our video at Fair Oaks Station. And then there were several roads, the 9 Mile Road, the Williamsburg Stage Road, that all collided in this area. Inevitably, this was a Confederate victory. They did take the portion of the battlefield. They did keep the Union troops pushed back. They did save the city of Richmond thanks to the incompetent leadership of George McClellan. This, once again, was a humiliating defeat for Union soldiers who had gotten just a few miles from the outskirts of Richmond and were being sold on to Richmond throughout the year 1862. They got this close. They had more troops. They had outnumbered and outgunned the Confederate troops, yet the Confederate troops held this ground and protected the city of Richmond. And again, sadly, the battlefield of Fair Oaks has been lost to development with the Richmond International Airport and the town of Sandston, Virginia. Again, I have hand-drawn a map of the action, which I will be posting inside the video, and hopefully you'll come and visit this battlefield.